Hey, I'm Sarah, and this is the Goddess in Training podcast. This isn't about being perfect or polished or having it all figured out. This is about what happens when you actually start listening to your body, your intuition, your patterns, your truth. I'm asking big questions and having real conversations, sometimes messy and sometimes magical, with people who've lived through it, grown through it, and still don't have all the answers. If you've ever doubted yourself, betrayed your gut, or wondered if you're the only one, you're not. Let's talk about it. Welcome back to Goddess in Training. Have you ever felt like you've done all the work, the therapy, the journaling, the self-help books, and yet something still feels just out of reach? Like there's a layer underneath all of it that you haven't quite been able to touch? Today's guest works in exactly that space. Juliana Sloane is a hypnotherapist, depth hypnosis practitioner, shamanic counselor, and Buddhist meditation teacher whose approach she describes as evidence-based magic. And I have to say that phrase stopped me in my tracks the first time I heard it because it perfectly captures something I've been trying to name for years. We go deep in this conversation. We talk about what hypnosis actually is and why it can reach places that talk therapy simply can't. We talk about shamanic journey work, what it feels like, and why the drum beat matters. We talk about plant medicine, integration, and what it means to work with a healing experience rather than just have one. We talk about anxiety, fear, and the profound gift of sitting in silence. Juliana also shares pieces of her own story, being born nearly 12 weeks premature, growing up with a shamanic mother, a 2-month silent retreat that changed everything, and the winding road that led her to this work. This one is rich. Grab your tea, get comfortable, and let's go. Hi, welcome back to Goddess in Training. I'm your host, Sarah, and today I am here with Juliana Sloane, who's a hypnotherapist, a coach, shamanic practitioner, and meditation coach, right? So many different things, and so many of us, Juliana, go through this process where we start in one place and end up in a completely different place, and life is all about the journey and learning new skills. And so I'm so excited to hear about your path. And the thing that stood out to me the most, what you said was, you believe in evidence-based magic. And that really resonated with me because that's the world, isn't it? I mean, so much of what we experience feels more like magic than anything else. And sometimes the evidence doesn't seem to make sense. So where did you come up with that phrase and how does that permeate the work that you do?
Absolutely. I couldn't tell you exactly where the phrase came to me, but it feels like the through line of a great deal of my work, whether it's teaching meditation and supporting people on the Buddhist path or working with hypnosis or shamanic journey work. The thing with all of this is that these are primarily ancient wisdom traditions that have been passed down generation to generation that can be found across many, many continents. And all of them support a really profound sense of well-being, a capacity to change, a capacity to connect with spirit and the mystical. And, one of the fascinating things as we enter this age where we are so science-driven, we do want evidence-based solutions. The through line of all of this ancient work is that now people are popping folks in fMRI machines and seeing, well, what actually happens in the brain. They're doing controlled trials and seeing, well, what happens in group A that's doing shamanic journeys and group B that's not. And what they're finding is what these ancient lineages and traditions have been saying all along, that they are profound drivers of change. And so really, it may feel like magic. And I think in many ways it is. It feels deeply mystical, numinous, powerful, and at the same time, pretty much anything that I'm doing with clients or anything that I'm teaching also has a basis in scientific, evidence-backed effectiveness. These things are not actually mutually exclusive.
It's such an exciting time to be alive because that evidence piece is accelerating so quickly and we have so much information, like you said, about what's happening in the brain and it's lining up so much with the personal experience too. These things that people have just relied on their intuition and their experience now can point to for those people who need that evidence backup. Like, look at the amazing things. I utilize plant medicine and just the amount of studies coming out confirming everything that I know and then so much more. I would love to hear your perspective. Like I said, I do use plant medicine, and I think that mushrooms in particular taught me how to meditate. And I had meditated before, but it got me to that place so quickly and allowed me to then access that place. And I've talked to some people who kind of look down on plant medicine as it's kind of like a shortcut to get to this place. What's your response to that? Do you feel like it's a shortcut? And what's your experience? I know that you said that, and it's true. My experience too is that with meditation, with shamanic journey work, you get to the exact same place as you can with plant medicine.
Absolutely. And so, my take on this, I do a lot of plant medicine preparation and integration work with clients because I do think it's a really profound driver for change and for healing. I think, especially psilocybin, can be a way of people tapping into what feels like a kind of a field of benevolence, honestly, in what I have seen in my own experiences and my experiences with clients. So, the thing really where I think it's important to start to pick some of the pieces apart of plant medicine, meditation, hypnosis, shamanic journey work, whatever it is we're doing, what really matters is the intention. We can go to a plant medicine ceremony or do therapist assisted psychedelics and have a really powerful intention for growth, for wisdom, for healing. And it can be an incredible support. We can also treat it as a shortcut and think that it's going to do the work for us. And with any healing modality, the thing that I would caution somebody who wants to take that approach of, oh, it's going to do the work for me, I'm just going to sit back and be changed, is, any healing modality is a co-creative process. We also have to engage. We also have to do the work. One of the things that I really love about the modalities that I use with people, like depth hypnosis, like shamanic journey work that does not involve a psychedelic substance as part of it, is that for many people, using psychedelics, using plant medicine, it can be kind of like drinking from the fire hose. It's a lot all at once. I have so many people who have come to me after ayahuasca retreats and they're like, I feel like I got so much information. There is so much here and I have no idea what to do with it. And this is really the point where that use of any healing modality, it can be really onward leading and supporting, or we can just get stuck in it. Because if we don't actually know how to work with that experience, how to integrate it, how to take different disparate pieces of it and really bring it into our understanding and make meaning of it and let it influence our actions and choices, we're going to have had a cool experience and then we're going to go back to our life and nothing will change. So I think that there's really something here in the intentionality and how we work with any type of modality that we're working with.
It's so true. It really is. But sometimes my experience has been that you go in with a specific intention and you come out with something very, very different. And I think that it's a difference between maybe intention and attachment to some kind of specific outcome. And my experience with hypnosis, which I only have one clinical experience with hypnosis, fits into that particular box where this was many, many, many years ago, very early in my healing journey. And I just happened to win a session with a hypnotherapist. And I went in with the intention, like, I would like to work on losing weight. I went deep into hypnosis and came out not with any information about how to lose weight, but I felt profoundly changed in terms of my perception of my marriage, of my relationship. And I didn't and was very, very surprised that that is what came out, and I have no specific memory of how I got there, but I felt changed kind of in the same way that I have with plant medicine, where, you know, you get whatever it is that you need in that moment. And sometimes, like you said, that integration piece, it can take years and years and years to unfold the meaning of that. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that. And I would also love to hear more about what is depth hypnosis and how that's different than other kinds of hypnosis.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start there. Actually, depth hypnosis is, I work in a couple of different hypnotherapeutic modalities. So, depth hypnosis is one of the modalities that I practice in. And the really unique and interesting thing about depth hypnosis is that it actually is a combination of Buddhist wisdom, shamanic practice and wisdom, hypnotherapy, and transpersonal psychology. So it is taking a lot of different transformative catalytic processes for healing and bringing them all together into a modality that can be actually quite accessible for people, whether they consider themselves spiritual or not spiritual or scientific, whatever it is. The great thing about hypnosis is while my orientation is spiritual, there is space for everything and everyone in this kind of a practice. And
Hmm.
part of I'll even name a little bit within the depth hypnosis practices around integrating plant medicine experiences. Part of the beauty of this sort of work is that we can take a feeling, an image, a core belief that gets exposed, a momentary experience in the psychedelic journey. We can bring that into the hypnotic state and begin to work in trance to understand it more deeply, to explore some of the kind of tendrils that flow out of it, to find, okay, well, if this is the starting point of the healing, what else needs to happen for people to really understand the fullness, the richness of what that psychedelic experience is pointing to. There's also a modality that I use that's actually called hypnopsychedelics.
Mm.
And it is a hypnotherapeutic technique for bringing to light some of the same kinds of psychedelic experiences that one might have on a plant medicine ceremony or with assisted psychedelics. And this is really, really wonderful for people who, maybe it's money, maybe it's time, maybe it's a health condition, maybe it's just some fear and hesitation of not being ready to step into some kind of a plant medicine experience. So this allows people to actually have psychedelic type experiences that are profoundly transformative without the use of a substance. I found this to
Mhm.
be really great, especially with people who are in sobriety.
Because it's understandable that people have concerns around using plant medicine when you're on a sobriety journey. I'd love to dig in more on shamanic journeying. One of these things in my life that felt like it happened to me is when I entered college. My freshman seminar that was given to me was called The Way of the Shaman, and we did shamanic journeying without plant medicine. Although the professor hinted around very frequently that like, yeah, maybe you guys should try this. But at the time, I, had been in the DARE program and was like, no. It took many, many, many years for me to be
These
open to it.
childhoods, yes.
Uh-huh. Right, right. But it was wild to have a professor kind of hinting
Hmm.
around like, oh yeah, they're out there. You should maybe think about it. I appreciate having that as my basis though, and knowing that it is possible to get to those places without plant medicine, without psychedelics, because it is so powerful. And I have done it since as well. And the kinds of journeys I have been on is where you're specifically looking for guides and going down into the depths and finding those symbols that can then help you on your journey. For people who are unfamiliar with shamanic journeying, what does that look like when you're with a client?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one interesting thing as we're stepping into that, I do all my work with people over Zoom. And so, one thing that people are always a little bit amazed by is oh, it's possible to do powerful shamanic work and powerful hypnotic work over Zoom. One of the beautiful things is actually, as a client, you'll be in the comfort of your own home. So, you might be lying on your couch in a space that already feels comfortable, safe for you. You don't have to get on the highway or hop on a subway afterwards, which is a beautiful thing. And I say that as somebody who has had to do all of that after going into a deep trance. And I don't want to get on the highway. You shouldn't either. No. So, the way that I work with people in the shamanic journey work is to use the journey as the primary modality of inquiry and counseling. And so, somebody might come to me with an issue that they're working on, knowing that they've been talking about it in therapy for years, but it just feels like there's something below the surface. This is where things like shamanic journey work can come in and be really, really supportive because we're bypassing that analytical, logical, talk based mind, and we're going into that liminal space where more of our wisdom and our knowing is possible. What this looks like is we use the drum. So there will be a rhythmic drum beat. And the beautiful thing about this, it's found across many, many cultures. The sound of the rhythmic drum entrains the mind to go into trance. So people find that they can often somewhat effortlessly, like you've described, go up or go down, connect with a guide, connect with this source of support and wisdom and compassion, and have experiences that do feel quite magical, but also feel incredibly meaningful, often bring up information either in the form of symbol or archetype or metaphor, but also simply in sometimes quite clear, quite frank and concise information that they can take and use in their own day-to-day life. So, sometimes this is when people are struggling with their career and they're feeling blocks in terms of how do I even get to a place in my career where I'm feeling happy and content and not on the verge of burnout. I also use shamanic journey work with people around pain, around confidence, all kinds of things. I was just talking to a client earlier this week who we've been working with the shamanic journey for many different things. This really is a way of exploring so many facets of life and so many places where we want change. But in a recent session, we just happened to be working with back pain, chronic back pain that had been there for years. And often these processes unfold over time. Sometimes there are those lightning bolt moments. She came back to me this week in our next session and said, I don't have back pain anymore. It went away after our session and it hasn't returned and it's been a few months. And, that is one of we don't know what is possible in these states. Sometimes the transformation feels like a pebble in a stream being slowly smoothed out over time. And sometimes there are these things that just come undone within one session. And you look back and it's like, oh, that's been resolved.
Wow, I love those moments. They certainly have happened to me. Tell me more about your own journey and moments where I suspect, like so many of us, like I'd said with the way of the shaman class, that was just felt like it was given to me. I'm sure you have moments where things were given to you, and then moments where you listened to your intuition and went down a path that didn't make logical sense. What are some of those moments that happened in your life to get you where you are today?
Yeah, it really has been such a lifelong, winding road. I was so fortunate that I grew up in a place deeply immersed in nature. And so just intuitively as a small, small child, I remember being 4 or 5 years old and leaving little offerings of chocolates to the river near my house.
Wow.
It was just something that I intuitively knew somehow that sitting on this bridge and leaving an offering to the creek flowing by, that there was something there that needed to happen, that I was in relationship with nature. So some of this goes back truly as far as I can remember. The first shamanic practitioner I ever knew was my mother. She had her own shamanic practice when I was especially teenage. And of course, at that time, you're individuating. So I saw it and I was sort of like, no, it's not really my thing. I went into a different direction. I became very engaged with Hindu kirtan chanting with Buddhist practice. And that really was the path that I followed for a period of time. I continue to be a Buddhist teacher to this day. I've been teaching for the last decade. And so that is absolutely still at the heart of my path. And then, of course, many different moments punctuated this. I experienced a trauma almost 20 years ago at this point, and it was a choice point. It was a moment of, if I don't turn towards the life that I really want, which was a life imbued with magic and with the sacred and with mystery, then I will not be living the life that I know to be authentic to me. And of course, there are twists and turns. There's the ways that we try and fit ourselves into a society that doesn't always leave room for these kind of experiences, and discover over and over that it doesn't really work so well to fit into that box. I think that's been a little bit of a lifelong journey. And so truly, there have been so many different choice points. The shamanic work, to me, it arrived when the time was right. And it came up so naturally, so organically. Some friends said, "Hey, we're going to this workshop. Do you want to come?" And I hopped in the car and joined them. And I had no idea in that moment that accepting that invitation from these dear friends would transform my life, my relationships, my career. Truly, everything from that point forward changed. Because I was already having shamanic experiences, but I didn't have the tools or the information of how to make meaning of them, how to work with them, how to understand them. I remember being in a 2-month-long silent retreat and having these powerful visionary and energetic experiences that didn't quite fit into the box of the practices we were following. I was so lucky that the teacher that I was working with most closely in that moment was not just a Buddhist meditation teacher, but an indigenous woman who also understood that shamanic side of experience. So I was able to tell her what my experiences were, and she was able to actually receive them and support me in really embracing them rather than trying to push them away. Because if you are doing certain styles of meditation that are focused on concentration, the instruction, if something comes up like this, is to note that it's happening and then return to the object of concentration. I was so fortunate that, my experience wasn't swept away. It was embraced. And all of these things, they accumulate over time. There's a momentum that happens when we start following the path that we know is true to us.
And the beauty of it is there are so many different paths. You mentioned being somebody who embraces mystery, which I love that so much. In a way, almost the opposite of living a fear-based life. What role does fear play in your life, if any?
You are talking to somebody who has lived with anxiety their whole life. I was terrified as a child. Terrified.
Really?
Oh,
Wow.
absolutely. I was born 11, almost 12 weeks premature. I spent the first months of my life in an incubator, receiving very little, great care, but, not the human contact that a child needs. And I had many different baffling health issues moving through my childhood. There was a period of time when I was young that every single night I was in so much physical pain that I thought tonight might be the night that I will die. And, my experience with all of this is, fear is a profound human experience. It points to our mortality, our fragility, our vulnerability. And it's something, to be respected rather than bypassed completely. If we didn't have some level of fear, I would be concerned. That is something that is, us normal people, unless we are completely enlightened, we're going to have fear. It's part of the human experience. However, part of what I find to be so profound about working with altered states is the way that it can transform our relationship to fear, because we're going into the unknown constantly. We never know in a trance or in a journey what is exactly going to happen. There are things that will surprise us. We will find ourselves in places working with things that we could never have guessed. And so there's something in doing trance work, just in that that allows us to have greater capacity to venture into the unknown, into the mystery, into the things that might have caused fear in the past. When we couple that with the fact that we're also in these states experiencing profound wisdom and resourcing and love, and often a sense of being held by something much, much bigger. We're getting in contact with that within us, which is vast and knowing and connected to everything. That does transform fear. And sometimes, of course, the fear comes back in different ways, shapes, and forms. But the more we practice in this way, we also get to connect more and more and more with the parts of ourselves that are so much greater, so much bigger, so much more powerful than the fear, that the balance of that relationship begins to sway and change.
As somebody who also has many, many experiences with profound anxiety in my life, when I was going through a very, very difficult divorce, I was in a place where I kept myself so busy all the time because I would start spiraling if I sat with my thoughts for too long. And the anxiety just took over. And I'm so fascinated by a 2-month long silent retreat because my mentor at the time would gently say, I think you just need to sit home in silence and be with yourself. And I was so resistant. And honestly, it wasn't until COVID when I was kind of forced. I wasn't allowed to go out. So I then was forced to sit and be with myself. And that was the most transformative healing thing that I have ever done beyond any plant medicine or any kind of practice. It's sitting and just pausing and being with ourselves. Talk more about 2 months of that and what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm such a big proponent. If you can go on a silent retreat at some point in your life, anyone who's hearing this, look into that because it is incredibly powerful. That to me has been a life-saving practice. And part of it, we do live in such a crazy, fast-paced world. There was a study actually done in 2009. This is pre-smartphone. So tuck that into the back of your mind. This study in 2009 by the University of California at San Diego, they looked into people's information diet. So basically all the information that we consume through our phones, our email, the advertising, everything we take in a given day. And they found that the average information diet for an American was the equivalent of a quarter of the 1,400-page book War and Peace every single day.
Wow.
Every single day. We are not actually wired to take in that level of data. And that was 2009. I did not have a smartphone in 2009. Instagram was not a thing. TikTok, whatever our doom scroll of choices, continuous scrolling didn't exist at the time. So we probably are consuming more like, I don't know, half of War and Peace at this point. I would not be surprised. And so part of the benefit of silent retreat is that there is not just the meditation practice and Dharma teachings, guidance on how to meditate in a way that actually supports your nervous system and your practice, but simply the structure of
Mhm.
going away, being in silence, not having the demands of
Mhm.
our computers and our phones and our work and our families for a period of time, and simply seeing, who are we when we don't have all of that data and information and demand pulling at our attention minute after minute? And that does take time to unfold. Oftentimes in silent retreats, the first few days, people will simply be falling asleep in the middle of the meditation practice because so many of us are so tired, because we're so overstimulated. All of a sudden, we get into an environment that is peaceful and quiet. The system is like, "Ooh, is it nap time? And
Mhm.
then over a period of time, the energy returns, the awareness gets more rich, more vast, more precise. And we're able to start noticing more of who we are, how our mind works, the movement of our body, our mind, our heart, when it is in the conditions of seclusion, of not having all of this stuff tugging at us all the time.
And for someone who thinks 2 months, what's the difference between doing a short silent retreat and something so long?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a spectrum. I would say don't worry too much about the length if you're new to this kind of practice. It was an incredible privilege for me to be able to actually take a leave of absence from my job at the time and be in silence for 2 months. That was a gift. And I remember one of my teachers really at that time, kind of taking me by the shoulders and being like, you do not know what is going to happen in your life. This may be the only time that you can sit like this. So if you have the opportunity to do it, do it. And I'm so grateful that I took that advice. And at the same time, I have had 3-day, 7-day, 10-day retreats that also were profoundly powerful and transformative. The real importance here is actually giving ourselves that space to be. And whatever amount of time we can spare, given the conditions of our life, that's going to be of benefit.
When I work with people with psilocybin, so often that is what happens initially too, is that, and this has happened in my own practice as well. There are some times where you take the medicine and nothing happens other than profound rest. And because that's what we need, we don't pause, we don't allow ourselves any space whatsoever. And when I'm talking to people about how to tap into your intuition, you have to allow for that space in order to recognize the signals that are being sent to us and embody them and listen to the body and sort out what is logic and what is intuition. And it's in those pauses that that I think that that really opens up. Tell me more about how you've woven your Buddhist practice throughout everything in your life and where that started. How did you get into Buddhism? It is also something that I resonated with very, very early in my life. And I feel like for me, it was a simplistic way of understanding the world and learning how to pause and learning how to listen to the body and kind of the basic rules of how to be a kind and generous human being. How did that start for you?
It's a great question. There were elements of this that were infused in parts of my life, and I didn't even realize it because of the communities that I was surrounded by growing up. So some of it was a little bit baked in. And then there were moments of recognition that pointed me in that direction more and more fully. First, there was a period of time before I came into Buddhist practice that I was very engaged with chanting practices, primarily in the kind of Hindu kirtan tradition. It's a very ecstatic, very beautiful, joyful, devotional practice. And at the time, there was, and this is very much another another story for another time. There was a guru who I was a teenager. He took quite a fancy to me. Fortunately, got out relatively unscathed. But at the time, he told me, he looked at my astrological chart and he actually said, you're going to devote your life to meditation. Your path is one of being a spiritual teacher. And when he said, you're going to devote your life to meditation, at that time I had tried meditating and it was just the endless litany of challenging thoughts coursing through my mind. I'm pretty sure I laughed and gave him the finger. I was like, I'm not so sure about it. Here it is. Many years later, yes, that is what happened. I did devote my life to meditation.
Not in the way
Strange.
that you had expected.
Not in the way that I had expected. Not at all. Fortunately, very, very fortunately. And, from that point onwards, I was already at that point in college, I think when that encounter happened, I was a freshman in college. I'd known this person since I was probably 15 or 16. I was studying religious studies in college. And so I naturally started to gravitate to some of the classes on Buddhism. And I remember reading a book by Thich Nhat Hanh. And what struck me deeply, deeply, deeply in that moment was actually Thich Nhat Hanh's description of the five precepts in Buddhism. These are the things that we are refraining from in order to not cause harm. And so these are things like refraining from violence to ourselves and others, refraining from harsh or deceitful speech, refraining from sexual misconduct. And I looked at that, and it just was like a lightning bolt through me of how dramatically different my life would have been at that point as, an 18-year-old woman, had the people around me, especially the adults, but also my peers, been living in a way that was committed to not harming. It struck me to my core. And that really has been a guiding light of, how do we live in a way that doesn't cause harm to ourselves or to other beings? And that is a lifelong process. We will never be perfect. This is aspirational. But, there was something in that that really stuck with me. And so then every time I would get nudged more and more and more into that path, I just kept on walking forward.
I think a lot about polarity and the world in which we live and whether it's necessary to experience hardship and harm. And if we had a complete lack of that, would we learn and grow? And I think about that, especially in the time that we're living in right now, because so many people are seeking these kinds of answers because the world just seems so different than or what we expected it to be. And it doesn't feel real. And then you're questioning, well, what is real? Which is then allowing us to widen our aperture and to explore more of these metaphysical things, which I think is a beautiful, beautiful time. And I'm very excited to be alive in this period of time. But I don't think it would exist without the polarity, without the profound evil and harm that's happening at the same time as this elevation. What are your thoughts on the time that we're in and how it's affecting people and whether it is possible even to live in a world where there is no harm?
Yeah, absolutely. This is actually core to a lot of the Buddhist teachings. There is, in many Buddhist cosmologies, an understanding that this human realm is one that is supposed to. And, and I'm saying supposed to because at this point, I think we may have tipped the balance. Supposed to have the right combination of joy and well-being and happiness and suffering and difficulty, that people have the right motivation between those two to strive to wake up. So it's just the right amount of friction. There's actually a Tibetan Buddhist prayer that is basically asking, please give me just the right amount of suffering so that I keep on wanting to wake up. Now, the time that we are living in, I have questions. I do wonder if the balance of that has actually tipped so much that the level of suffering that we are in makes it profoundly more challenging to wake up or to aspire to live in a way that is harmless. There are so many systems of harm that we are complicit in and cannot actually step out of. Even under the best of circumstances, we cannot separate ourselves unless we go completely off the grid from capitalism. We cannot completely step away from patriarchy because currently until, until we get to make a change. It's the water we're swimming in. And we have to find ways within ourselves and our communities to unravel that and make the changes that are needed. And, I don't know where we are at now. We are facing just profound, mind boggling challenges. And at the same time, I do see the creativity, the altruism, the possibility, the way that people are pushing on boundaries of the things that we have assumed, well, this is just the way that it is, that I do still have hope that something can come of this as long as we all stay as committed as possible to our own healing and learning, and also being a compassionate and helpful presence in the world. But we're on a ride right now. This is serious business.
Where do you start with somebody who comes to you and is feeling that extreme anxiety that is very understandable right now and feeling like you don't know where to start? I want to feel differently. I want to walk through the world in a different way. But what's your advice on where's the place to start?
Absolutely. There's two kind of core places that I tend to start with people. One is actually supporting people in learning some of the ways of interrupting and settling that cycle. So when anxiety spikes, we know that any emotion basically only lasts for about 90 seconds. It's what we do to perpetuate it and keep it going that makes us really miserable. So part of this is actually learning the techniques and the strategies to interrupt that thought loop or that reactivity or that, pattern of contraction, whatever it is, and bring in relief. So sometimes I'm actually working with people on quite practical levels of here are the tools that you can use every single day that will help you get out of that pattern. Because part of what happens with anything from chronic pain to anxiety to self-criticism, some of this is a habit of the mind. We are practicing the same pattern over and over. It's strengthening the neural pathways connected to that pattern or habit. And so it becomes the most effortless choice for our brain. And so we go the path of least resistance. Our brain craves less friction, greater energy efficiency. And so sometimes when I'm working with people, it really is, all right, how do we stop that from being the dominant pathway? How do we find a new way forward where there can be more space and more ease? The other side of things really is this space of magic, of transcendence, of feeling into the sacred. Because one of the things that will absolutely just topple over that anxiety or fear or whatever it is that we are working with is feeling into how profoundly connected we are to something bigger than ourselves, how vast and beautiful and luminous our consciousness is. And so I tend to balance a little bit of that. I like to offer practical and pragmatic solutions, but often the most practical and pragmatic solution actually is a spiritual solution, actually is feeling into how sacred our experience really is.
That has been my experience for sure. And yeah, it's just amazing to see all of the different ways that people can get to kind of the same conclusion that we are so interconnected and there is so much more than what's right in front of us. And to have reverence for all of the human experiences where we kind of started the conversation. Juliana, thank you so much for this conversation. What's coming up for you? What are you excited about that's coming up in the next few months?
Yeah, well, coming up in actually just a month from now, April 30th to May 3rd, I'll be leading a women's meditation retreat in Northern California. It's a glamping retreat. We'll be partially in silence, partially connecting with each other and also connecting with nature. So if you were listening and that sense of, oh, I need to take a couple of days and be in some peace and some silence. If that appeals to you, that's one thing to check out. And then, of course, I teach throughout the month, every month at different Buddhist communities, primarily Most of these are available online. So if folks are interested in exploring a meditation practice, you can always drop in on classes with me. Most of these classes are donation based. So it's a really low barrier to entry for anyone who's interested in exploring that path. And then, of course, I work with people one on one. One of the main things that I do is support people individually in their own goals for growth, for healing, and for transformation. And so all of this can be found on my website. There's a really easy button to click if you'd like to have a 20 or 30-minute chat to see if working together is best for you. And I'll make sure that you have all those links, of course.
Excellent. Yeah, they'll all be available in the show notes. Juliana, thank you so much. I really appreciate spending this time with you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's been so nice having this time with you. Thank you so much for a great conversation.
Thank you for tuning in to Goddess in Training. I hope something in this episode stirred your knowing or softened your heart. If it spoke to you, share it with someone who needs it, or leave a review or comment to help others find us. If you're watching on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to hear more conversations like this, please consider supporting Goddess in Training on Patreon. For more tools and offerings to deepen your intuition practice, visit goddessintraining.online. You can also join the Scroll of Seshat on Substack for twice-weekly stories of how I followed my intuition. The music for Goddess in Training is Madre Ayahuasca by Arkawa, and you can find more of his music in the link to his website in the show notes. Remember, your intuition is not a mystery, it's a memory. Keep listening. Resplandor del fuego, estrellita